Okay, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I'm here with Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport, Annie Koutrakis. Thank you all for joining us. Canadians deserve a smooth and efficient transportation system. But as we've seen over the last few years, a disruption in one part of the system can have wide effects across the entire network, in fact, across the entire globe. We want to ensure the needs of Canadians are met. On vous s'assurer que notre secteur répond aux besoins des Canadiens. Today, I've introduced Bill C-52, the Enhancing Transparency and Accountability in the Transportation System Act. J'ai présenté un projet de loi. The goal of this bill is to improve transparency and accountability in 3 areas of the federal transportation network. Part 1 would introduce the Air Transportation Accountability Act. It would give the authority to make regulations to require airports and other air operators to create service standards for their part of the passenger journey. Examples could include how long it should typically take for a bag to arrive on the carousel or the expected wait time to enter security screening. In addition, service providers would have to communicate their performance for these standards and explain the extent to which they have been met publicly to ensure transparency. These changes would also ensure transparency when it comes to changes in the airspace routes. This bill would require that there be a formal process for notifying and consulting communities on proposed changes that affect airport noise. Part 1 of the bill would also require larger airport authorities to make their pollution reduction plans public to help us meet our goals of net zero by 2050. And it would require federally incorporated airport authorities to report on diversity among their directors and senior management to ensure they represent the diversity of our country. These changes would build on other steps we've recently taken to improve the air travel experience for passengers in Canada, including introducing legislation to strengthen passenger rights, increasing data sharing among airports and air carriers to help reduce delays, and providing nearly $2 billion in additional funding in Budget 2023 for CATSA to reduce passenger wait times at security screening. Part 2 of today's bill would introduce changes to the Canada Transportation Act to help achieve a barrier-free transportation sector for persons with disability. Le projet de loi va améliorer l'accessibilité. Transportation service providers in the federal transportation system, including airlines, ferries, and passenger trains, would have to collect and provide accessibility data to the Minister of Transport as well as the Canadian Transportation Agency. This is in response to recommendations from the Auditor General's report on accessibility in the transport sector in March. And finally, Part 3 would amend the Canada Marine Act to provide greater transparency on how ports set their fees. It would require Canada Port authorities to follow certain principles when fixing port fees. In addition, it would create a process for people, including port users and tenants, to challenge a new or revised fee. So overall, the changes I've introduced today would further advance our transportation sector, supporting a more accountable, transparent, and accessible system that meets the needs of the sector and its passengers. Thank you, merci, and now I'll ask Annie to say a few words.
Hello everyone, bonjour à tous. Comme le ministre vient de lui dire, il s'agit d'une excellente nouvelle pour les Canadiens et pour notre secteur aérien. Ce projet de loi permettra la création de réglementations obligeant les aéroports et les autres opérateurs au sein des aéroports à créer des normes de service. Ces changements garantiront également une plus grande transparence lorsqu'il s'agira de modifier la conception de l'espace aérien pour les communautés susceptibles d'être affectées par le bruit des aéroports afin que leurs préoccupations soient entendues. Nous introduisions également des changements qui obligeraient les grands aéroports à rendre public leur plan de réduction de la pollution et à rendre compte de la diversité de leurs administrateurs afin de s'assurer qu'ils représentent la diversité des Canadiens. Ces mesures s'inscrivent dans le prolongement des travaux que nous menons pour renforcer les droits des passagers et rendre notre secteur aérien solide et efficace. Ce projet de loi apportera aussi des modifications à la loi sur les transports au Canada afin de rendre notre secteur plus accessible à tous. Enfin, il introduira des changements visant à assurer une grande transparence sur la manière dont les ports fixent leurs redevances. Overall, these changes will create a national transportation sector that is more accountable and transparent for all Canadians. As Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport, I am proud to support these new changes for our transportation sector today.
Happy to take your question.
Minister, you were asked just in the question period about, generally, just to kind of paraphrase that question, about how the government was going to prepare for a smoother travel experience this summer, and you pointed to this bill as one of the steps you were taking. Considering, we're less than a week away from the House rising, this bill obviously won't be passed. So, why did it take so long for this to get put forward, and also, how will it actually improve the travel experience?
Sure. Look, this bill has come to the floor of the House of Commons at a speed of light when it comes to how fast government works. If you recall, I organized a summit last November with the air sector, airlines, airports, CATSA, union, and other, including provincial governments. And we discussed a variety of lessons learned from the recovery from the pandemic. And we went out there and then started developing policies, consulting on those specific policies, and then getting cabinet approval, and then drafting legislation, and here we are today. But this was not the first step. We've strengthened passenger rights through the budget bill. As I said, we've now proposed modernization for CATSA. So we have been taking immediate steps after step. That's on top of all the action that we've been taking, including the publishing of a weekly dashboard on my social media, where we report on weekly performance of the airlines and airports to keep everyone informed about the progress. So look, I feel that we're taking real action as quickly as we can to ensure that we shore up the industry, we regain confidence that Canadians need to have in the industry, and ensuring that Canadians have the best experience.
But with respect, Minister, I mean, the Canadians saw how fast your government can move during COVID. So is it really your answer that this is just government moves really slow and give us credit because we moved as fast as government would allow us to? Like, why is this only coming now when the House is set to rise possibly tomorrow?
Yeah, look, first of all, when we were at the height of COVID, we told Canadians that we were going to take risk in policies implementation because we needed to do it as fast as possible. Canadians' livelihood, Canadians' health were at stake, and we took a lot of risks, but it was worthy risk to do it as quickly as possible. For this measure and other measures, we need to do it right, and we need to do the consultations that are required. We need to do the policy examinations that is required, and within a few months, this is only one measure of a suite of measures that I said. So I think it's also inaccurate to frame it as this is the first step that we've taken. We have been taking a lot of steps, even right after when the air sector opened, where we adjusted some bottlenecks for security screenings, where we worked with airports on funding. So we've done a lot of things. It's not accurate to say that this is the first step that we're taking, but we're building on all the work that we've been doing.
A lot of the consultations seem to be with industry. So what assurances can you provide to Canadians that these standards that will come into place will actually work for them and won't just benefit industry more, whom you have spent a lot of time talking to?
I actually talked to a lot of consumers advocates, so it's also not accurate to say that I only spoke to industry. I spoke to, and I continue to speak to, many industry advocates.
So what assurances that these standards will work for passengers? What assurances do you have?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm very confident that these standards will show tremendous improvement, and it will be. By the way, there is no other country in the world that has a similar framework to what we are proposing. We are a world-leading jurisdiction in ensuring further accountability and transparency in the air sector. This is great news for the sector. This is great news for Canadians who want to travel and those who work in the sector.
The standards will be set by industry, though, right?
No, the standards will be set by the Canadian Transportation Agency.
And what assurances do you have that they're going to work? Because some of the question is they're not even holding airlines accountable when passengers have missed their flights or have put compensation claims in. So why do you trust this agency who has not even arguably held airlines to account to do this properly?
Look, I will acknowledge that there's been many frustrations with the complaint process. That's why in the Budget Implementation Act, we have proposed, in addition to strengthening the passenger rights, we have implemented new processes and new tools for the CTA to be able to process these complaints faster, but also to hold airlines accountable for the number of complaints. Now, under the new regime, airlines will be paying for the complaints that the CTA receives. So we are strengthening these measures to, again, a new degree that had never been around before. We are doing, as a government, everything we can to hold industry responsible for what they promised Canadians to do. And we are learning from the lessons that we saw over the last 2 years.
Standards, if it's found that, whatever they turn out to be, that the airlines aren't meeting them, can you maybe talk about what kind of, repercussions they could face, or what can, passengers do to hold them to account?
So again, for airlines to deliver on commitments they made to passenger, that's already enshrined in the new passenger protection. What this new framework does, it ensures a shared accountability framework for the entire sector. Because as you recall, the sector is highly interdependent, and if some disruption happens at an airport in a luggage handling infrastructure, then it could have an impact on an airline performance. This framework now holds the sector accountable to each other. And the idea is that once you set a service standard, then airports will be accountable to airlines, airlines will be accountable to airports, NAV Canada will be accountable to airport, NAV Canada will be accountable to airlines, and ensure that all this interconnectability or interdependence is transparent, is accountable, and that there are consequences for those who don't hold up to their standards.
What can Canadians expect for travel this summer? You well know what Canadians saw with security lineups and delays last summer. What assurances, if any, can you provide that Canadians will not have a repeat of what they experienced last summer?
I can assure you that the government is playing its role in holding airlines and airports accountable for their performances. There's a lot of lessons that were learned from last summer. I've been in regular contact with airports, with airlines and other stakeholders on making sure that many of the systemic failures that took place last summer are not repeated. I feel that the system is much more prepared. However, I am keeping an eye on their performance. I am in regular contact, including yesterday, with airports and airlines, reminding them of the responsibility they have to customers, to passengers, and that I will be keeping an eye. And as I said, I am publishing weekly a dashboard that tells Canadians the performance of airlines and airports to ensure that the public has an idea and that airlines and airports are accountable. Okay.
What commitments have you received? You're talking to them, but I mean, that was answer we got last summer. We saw what happened at Christmas time. What commitments, if any, have you received from airlines, from airports that make you feel confident we will not see a repeat of what Canadians have experienced?
Let me say two things. First, I am receiving commitments from airlines and airports that they are more ready this year than they were last year, in terms of staffing, in terms of processes, in terms of operations. However, I'm not just taking their word for it. We've strengthened the passenger protection rights to ensure that airlines are held accountable if they fail to deliver on what they promised their customers. So we're doing two things. We're ensuring that the sector is aware of their obligation and that they're prepared, but we're also strengthening the protections for customers so airlines are held accountable if they don't deliver. Thank you.